Welcome to the Curling for Change podcast. My name is Will Robertson, and I will be your host for this limited series, brought to you by Curling Canada and sponsored by the World Curling Federation. Without further ado, let's get right into today's discussion. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Curling for Change podcast series. My name is Will Robertson. I'm here with Karen Trines, Helen Radford, and Greg Smith for our Curling with Pride episode, where we're going to have a conversation with folks from different aspects of the LGBTQ plus community in Canada and in the curling community, hear their stories, learn from them, and also kind of chat about some of the issues that are faced by the community within curling and what we can do a little bit about it. So this is our fourth episode that we've recorded. There's going to be a few others. So if you do appreciate the conversation or enjoy, please do share it. And we would really greatly appreciate that. And thank you for joining us. And thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to just get everyone to do a little intro first. Greg, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks for having us. This is wonderful to get to talk about this tonight. This is great. My name is Greg Smith. I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. I curl, and for years I ran the curling at a country club here in St. John's, and I identify as pansexual, and my pronouns are he, him. And I look forward to the discussions. I see this is shaking a little bit here on my my laptop but I look forward to this discussions tonight and share my perspective and hearing the perspectives of the rest of you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg. Helen, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Helen Radford. I work for Curling Canada. I'm manager of Next Gen. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I identify as lesbian, and I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Karen, off to you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen Trines. I'm excited to be here with this good group of people. I am located in Ottawa. I am a curler, although I'm semi-retired since having a baby last year. But I identify as pansexual. My pronouns are she, her. I'm just excited to chat tonight.
Absolutely. And I'm super excited for this conversation as well. I think it'll be really impactful. For the record, for everybody watching and listening, my pronouns are he, him. I identify as bisexual. And I'm really excited to get into this chat. So just to start, how did all of you come to curling? Where did you come to curling from? And what was that like? Helen, do you want to start?
Sure. I always played lots of sports growing up and didn't know anything about curling, but my sister was involved. And so she did really well in curling, and she's the one who got me started. And I was about 15, 16 when I started curling.
All right. Karen, how did you come to curling?
I was 5, so I didn't have much of a say in it, I don't think. It was just kind of a random, my friend across the street was going to an open house at a curling club, at the City View Curling Club in Ottawa. Asked if I wanted to join. His parents asked if I wanted to join. So I went, and I never stopped. It's been, I don't want to age myself now, but I guess you can say it's been 31 years since I started curling. I think he quit when we were maybe 10 or 12, but I just kept on going.
Fair enough. And you definitely didn't age yourself, okay? Right there.
Don't do the math. Just
No, I'm not counting.
I'm really bad at math, Karen.
Perfect. Excellent. That's great.
Greg, how'd you come to curling?
So I have no family connection in Newfoundland. That's like every competitive curler has a family connection to curling. But I don't. So my dad played semi-pro soccer in the 70s. I played soccer growing up, but my grandfather called me back in 2003. Kathy Cunningham from here was in the Scott final, but I watched the semi-final and then I watched the final. And then, Newfoundlanders, we're our own breed, right? So we're super patriotic. So we're like, oh, well, if she can do it, we should try it. So I went to an open house at the Remax Center, the St. John's Curling Club. And now I'm here. So the rest is history. But it's a great sport. And I think it's one of those sports where you try it, no matter what your connection is to it, you just want to keep doing it, no matter if it's competitive or recreational. It's just too much fun.
It's funny to meet another person, Greg, who doesn't have a family connection, because everyone's always like, "Oh, well, your parents must have curled." I'm like, they started curling,
Exactly.
after I did it for about 10 years, and my brothers did too. But like, it was random for me. It was just kind of, yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
It's true though. It's
Yeah,
super
most
true.
people come from like their families of curling for generations and stuff. So anyway.
Yeah.
No, we had a really good conversation in one of our other podcasts about like first generation curlers and the need to kind of make sure that
More of those.
we have more of them, but we also have the supports in place in our clubs to welcome them and keep them,
Yeah.
right? Because for people who have the kind of parental or family connection to curling, you may feel more welcome in the space, but for those who don't, it might be a little trickier to kind of get into a curling club and then feel safe there. So that was an interesting conversation in our BIPOC curlers changing the face of curling conversation. So so I'm always really interested when I meet people who are in the LGBTQ plus community in curling to know when the sport, which has been such a safe space for me, but also a really important space for me, intersected with your journey of identifying, if I can speak English, self-identity, sexuality, like when those kind of intersected for you, but also like how the curling community reacted to you or welcomed you. Karen, do you want to start?
Yeah. So, I dated men in the curling world for a while, when I was in my 20s. And then, so I dated a man that I knew from curling, and then I dated a woman in curling. So there wasn't necessarily a specific coming out, except that all of a sudden I was dating a woman. And so that was, it caused a certain amount of chatter, let's say, gossip throughout the curling community. This was, again, I'm going to age myself here, but it was over 10 years ago, that this happened. And so, there was gossip. I think that happens no matter what. It's a small community. People start dating new people, and it's always going to be, there's always talk around it. But obviously that was a bit of a surprise for a lot of people. And so there was a lot of chatter. I honestly consider myself very lucky in terms of the acceptance of me into this community. People, I didn't really have any negative interactions from the curling community. Nobody really, at least not to my face, nobody really, said anything hurtful or anything like that. People were pretty welcoming about it. I did play on the same team as my partner at the time, and we went to the Scotties together. And that was a bit of a interesting experience. Again, 10 years ago, I think people were not really sure how to approach it, whether they should kind of just not talk about it, or, it sort of still seemed a little bit of like a don't ask, don't tell, kind of keep it secret kind of thing. We had games where we were televised and the announcers kind of weren't really sure how to sort of address like, oh, these two are dating. It wasn't something that was really talked about as easily at the time, I think. And, no hard feelings about it, but I do think it was tiptoed around a little bit. It was challenging just to kind of figure out how to address it. I actually had a friend, now a former teammate, who worked for TSN at the time, and she asked me, did you ask them not to talk about it? Because no one's saying anything. I said, no, like we put it in our media guides. We were very open about it, but no one is talking about it. So she took matters into her own hands and started speaking about it. And then a couple of reporters came from that. And so there were a few stories written and stuff. But it was an interesting experience because in my bubble, it's so accepted and so easy to talk about. And so going into an environment where it wasn't quite as open, again, there was no hostility or anything. It just was sort of not discussed. It was just, people just weren't really sure what to do with it, I think. So it was an interesting experience. It's what led me actually to, I volunteer now with You Can Play, and the COC's One Team initiative. And so it kind of led me to that sort of volunteer work to try and make it easier for people and for people not to be so unsure about what to do when they have a queer curler. And things have obviously drastically changed since then. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But that was sort of my experience with the whole coming out process within the curling community.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I just wonder, like, at the time, you said you were aware of this. Did you feel perhaps like treated as a bit of a taboo, or when people tiptoed around that, like, was that, how did that impact you then? You spoke to being aware of it, but
yeah. I mean, it was, I think we certainly didn't want to cause a stir. We weren't there, we're there to compete. This obviously wasn't, our prime focus, but it was a little, there was a moment we watched the recording. We were playing against Jennifer Jones at the time, I think, and the announcer sort of said, "Oh yeah, so I was Karen Sagal at the time. That's Karen Sagal and her partner. They're a couple." And it was just kind of awkward silence, and then they moved on to something else. We all kind of had, a bit of a laugh about it because, I don't think that certainly I don't think anyone meant any harm, or anything like that. But it was just, they were trying to figure out how to manage this with maybe a viewership that may or may not be inclusive with, viewers. They just didn't know, I think, what the reaction would be. And I don't know that there was necessarily thought put into it that it was premeditated or not, and maybe it was just an awkward thing for the people doing the announcing. But we were aware of it, and it was a little bit, I don't know, a little disheartening, I suppose, but we, I guess, just mostly tried not to focus on it. When those reporters did show up and we did start speaking about it a bit more, and there were a couple of articles written, everyone says don't read the comments, and you of course read the comments, and there are some pretty horrible comments, but a lot of really just why do we need to know about this? Like, who cares who they're sleeping with? Like, why is this relevant? Let's focus on the curling. And it was kind of funny because there was literally another article right below it that was like, this person's husband, who are both competitive curlers, was there watching, cheering them on. Oh, it's so great to see them and their family. So like bias is showing when people don't necessarily mean to, but definitely, some of the comments were pretty brutal. You kind of have to stay away from that section for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for going a bit further with that. I think, it's really, you touched on a couple of really interesting things there. Firstly, the comment section and the way that now in the world of social media that, we all live in, and it's a reality for professional curlers especially, but also just us as human beings. And the reaction to it, I think we'll probably touch on that a few times, but also, yeah, there's a celebration of family in curling often, rightly or wrongly, right? Yeah. Like, if it's great when people have kids or get married, and congratulations, that's fantastic, that's amazing, and sure, we should celebrate that. But that's a really interesting point that you put there of, okay, well, if we're going to celebrate, our accomplishments in our personal lives in terms of, oh, here is this beautiful family, or this vision we have of the stereotypical family in curling, are we going to celebrate my family?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Curling Canada is really, I can see the difference, and I have, there's more about this in one of the future discussions, but I can see the difference now. You can see that they're really, really making an effort to make changes and to be more inclusive of everybody in all different types of families, and it's wonderful to see. I mean, you still see in the comment section, every June, Curling Canada changes their profile picture, and they do a really great job. The social media coordinator does a really great job of trying to stay on top of those comments and get rid of the really offensive ones. But there's always a few, who sneak in there with nasty comments. It happens still, we're in 2023, but this is still, and again, we'll probably talk about it later, but even I would say lately, it's worse than it was, honestly, than it was. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm from New Brunswick, and yes, it's worse.
Very time.
And so I can certainly relate to that. And the point of like visibility matters. Right. And it's nice when a national organization like Curling Canada understands that and then embraces it. Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you for speaking to that. Those were some really good points. Greg, when did your journey kind of intersect with curling for you, and how did people react?
So I came out on Christmas Eve to my parents in 2014, and then I waited. For some reason, why did I wait for the United States to legalize gay marriage? It was legal here, but I waited till actually that day, and then I posted a video on my Facebook, and then I think my teammates in between. Shout out to the guys from Stephenville. Even though I was across the province, they still knew I wasn't straight. So I told them in between, but I never really had a lot of issues there with that, to be blatantly honest. And just to touch a little bit on what Karen was discussing there, and thank you for being so raw and being so vulnerable on that. But it is such an oxymoron when people say, "Oh my God, isn't it amazing? Curling with, wife and husband curling is so amazing, and there's their kids and all that." And that is wonderful, but it's kind of strange then when the narrative is when they see a not straight couple and they say, "Oh, well, we don't need to know that. Like,
Who
keep
cares
that."
who they're sleeping with? Why is this relevant? Yeah.
Well, you know about every straight couple in curling, and you never make that comment, right? Like it's so absurd, and it's crazy. And those conversations, like you were just saying, um, those comments on social media, I think they're even more exaggerated, even more. I would say almost frequent or disgusting now than ever. For some reason, in a more divisive world, that these people feel that their argument has a little bit more weight, which really it has zero. But for some reason, what is the Dunning-Kruger effect or whatever? Is it where they think it's something like that. They think they're smart or something. They're not. But yeah. So thanks for touching on that. But it is true. It is just a complete oxymoron there. I didn't really have a lot personally with coming out with anyone in curling. I really had no issue with it. Some of them said, "Oh, we knew." And I was like, "Did you see I watched RuPaul's Drag Race or something? Like, did you log into my Netflix?" But I never really had an issue with that. The only thing, actually, I'm not going to say it because it's in a further question. So I'll
That's
wait
my
for
problem too. I'm like, I have stories, but they're later.
Yeah, I was like, okay, no, but that's later. I had no issue with my teammates. I had no issue with my coach. They just intersected at the same time as my personal life and my curling life. There was really no, there was really no, I don't know how you say, there was no real effects of it. There was nothing like, "Oh my God, Greg's not straight." It was never like that because they just assumed.
Yeah, and I guess my only question to that, Grace, is when people said or weren't surprised, right, when you came out, like, what was your reaction to that? 'Cause some people have very different reactions to that of I don't really care, or like,
I don't like it, but I didn't put a lot of weight in it because I know it was malicious.
mhm,
I don't like it because it's based on stereotypes. When
mhm,
you say, when when in their eyes and in some people's eyes, when a man is more feminine and a bit more flamboyant, they're gonna be like, right? And it's just like, like what a cheap shot. What a cheap shot. I can run faster than you. How come you didn't think that took why didn't that give me like 50 extra straight points? I don't know. Like, so
yeah,
I just find it so strange that they use the whole femme and butch kind of narrative to kind of say, well, this is your sexuality based on how you present or how you talk or how you act. And I think that that's pretty archaic. you know uh there's people across uh sexual orientation and gender that it isn't it isn't that you can't pinpoint it on the map, right? There's super masculine men that are queer, and there's super feminine men that are queer. And I like to consider myself somewhere in the middle there, but though I guess some of them might want to put me in the more femme category, but I would like to consider myself more in the middle. And it's just so across the board. Like it's a spectrum. It truly is. Both gender and sexual identity, sexual orientation. It is a spectrum, and people want to put people in certain boxes so they can make sense in their own brain. But truly, that's not how, in my opinion, it should work. And I think that we should eradicate some of that. I think it's just it's kind of stupid.
Coming from the other side of that, Greg, where people were very surprised on my end,
Yeah.
being like, "Oh, but she's femme, she's not wearing
Yeah.
plaid and her hair isn't short." So it's interesting being on like the other side of that, where I have to kind of come out very frequently because like people sort of make the assumption I'm straight passing, let's say.
Yeah.
And so people tend to make assumptions. Someone will say, "Oh, where's your husband?" Like that's just kind of assumed. And so it sort of causes me to have to repeatedly come out. I mean, I could have been, dating or married to a man, and then people would never ask, they would just assume. So, it's kind of interesting, kind of seeing both sides of it. It's either way, it's a challenge, I guess.
No, 100%. It is so strange how our society just automatically defaults
Yeah, they want to
someone to
box
be in
put you in.
big
When
time.
I dated a man, like I said, and then I dated a woman, and we
Mhm.
split up, and people were like, so who's she gonna like? Was that a phase? If she dates a man, then we know it's a phase next. If she dates a woman next, then she's a lesbian. Like there's no, it can't
Yeah.
be like everyone's just trying to figure out what box I fit in, you know? And
Yeah,
I was joking about how I'm just going to show up at the curling club with like 2 people and just really mess with their heads.
just
Yeah.
just to challenge it, right?
And that's
Um,
the sorry, well, I'll be really, really quick. We're actually a part of the 1%, according to a poll, Karen, that we're part of
Wow.
the 1% in the whole country being pansexual. But that's the
Wow.
whole thing about not being, you know, being in our community and not being gay or lesbian and being somewhere kind of in between, is that people think that whatever relationship that you have at that current time is a reflection of your sexual orientation, which isn't.
Right.
You know, it really isn't. You know, I'm attracted to men, I'm attracted to women, I'm attracted to people across different genders and attracted to them as a person, not, you know, not their gender. And that's kind of the thing, is that people don't really understand that. They just
Yeah.
assume automatically,
You know,
you
it's
know.
so funny. I had this I'm sorry, I'm like, we're commentating
okay.
the conversation here.
Sorry.
We'll call after, Karen.
Yeah. I can stop. We'll talk about it another time.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. What I would say to that as well is, like, you know, it comes back to this kind of normative thinking in terms of relationships and what we expect, and the stereotype that comes into that, and people kind of defaulting to it. You know, and one of the reasons why these conversations are really important is to try and break into that line of thinking and break that barrier a little. Um, and you know, similar to when our kind of lives intersect, and kind of break the barrier into sport. And kind of on that, you know, Helen, how did your journey kind of interact with curling eventually?
Well, I think for me, I'm 55, so social media, 30 years ago was non-existent. So, there's no comment section or something to that effect. So, and I'm a little bit more of a private person, and so I wouldn't necessarily just come out and, hey, I got something to tell you. You get to know people, and then you find out, who's your partner, and like Karen, I get that too, and is your husband on the account? And no, so sometimes it's just more of a correction, I find, than anything else. And I really haven't had any negative stories to tell about it, because it's been more of just sort of who I'm around, and nobody has had any issue with it whatsoever. And so I found the curling community was quite open and easy about it. Like, it was a non-question. It was more like, talk about your partner as opposed to who is your partner,
Mm-hmm.
like, for instance, I had my daughter through IVF, which is a whole different way of having kids. And yeah, no issue whatsoever. My issue was actually teaching. I was a teacher at the time and dealing with the school board and things like that. So for me, it was never an issue in sport.
Yeah, so, you know, thank you, Helen. And for those who may not know, do you want to just explain the acronym firstly you used, but also what that means just generally in terms of having kids? Some people may not know, or some people may not have understood.
Sure. So yes, this world is made of a million acronyms. So IVF is in vitro fertilization. So when 2 women are together, it's not possible to have a child. So we need science to help out a little bit. And yeah, so that's how I conceived my child. And I would say pretty much anybody who knows me has met my daughter somewhere along the way. So she's traveled with me everywhere, and she gets tired of hearing, "Oh, you're so big now. Oh, you've grown up so much." So, and I like that. I like that everybody kind of knows her, and it's a non-issue. And and she's proud that I work in curling, and knows that everyone in curling is very friendly towards me.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for that. Just, you know, I always try to take that moment to educate people a little more if they may not have heard or known. So thank you. for shedding some light on that for folks. And I think it's really great, Karen, to have you and Greg here as well to shine lights on different parts of the queer community more broadly. Because some people may think of it and just go, are they gay or are they not? There's the spectrum.
Black or white. Yeah.
Done. Right. And it's like, well, no, there's a number of other letters there for a reason.
That's why we have such a long acronym. There's so many of us all doing different things.
There's a lot of different elements of the community. And so I'm really glad we're able to get your perspectives. And so, on your perspectives and your experiences, which of course, like as you said, you all have so many stories and so many things to learn from and share with us. I just wanted to have you all share two experiences in curling. One that perhaps empowered or inspired you, and then one that may have disappointed you, in whichever order you want to share them. Helen, did you want to start?
Sure. I have a feeling my stories will be shorter than the other two.
We're chatterboxes. Sorry, Helen.
I think it's great. I think for me in curling, like it's been a very positive experience, and I didn't intend to I still curl, but I didn't intend to kind of go down the coaching path or even work in curling in my career. But Jerry Peckham, a mentor of mine who's been with Curling Canada a very, very long time, he's just all about relationships and getting to know people and getting the best out of you. And, he would ask me questions and we would have conversations, and, we're in very different parts of our lives, but, here was somebody who I looked up to as the director of high performance for Curling Canada, wanting to know about me, and wanting to make sure that it's important, like make sure there's balance in your life, make sure, family time is important, and talk about family. And he's become a very, very good friend of mine over the years. And, when I look back, he's probably the main reason why I work with Curling Canada, is because the leadership was so inclusive and understanding and interested, to follow your passion and to get to know people on a different level. So, I feel like I know him that way too. So I think, being vulnerable and having somebody who you wouldn't anticipate or think in your life is drawing things out of you, and then you create this great, working and personal relationship with them. I think that's really powerful. So I think for me, it's always been easy to talk about my private life with whomever I'm talking with. It's an open conversation. I don't usually lead with anything, but I'm always open to have a conversation about anything. The disappointments, I have to say, I can't think of any real disappointments. I live in Halifax, which is a very, what I find to be an inclusive city. So it's kind of anything goes, and you just, but I also have that personality too, where I can, have conversations in lots of different groups of people. And, I don't typically, I'm not the first one who's going to wave the flag or stand at the front of the parade or, go to the legislature, things like that. I think we all have different, we show leadership through different ways. I think mine is more through action, as opposed to, being front and center. I'm more the behind the scenes kind of person who does some work. So I haven't seen any, like I have to say, Greg has shared some things on social media, things that have happened to him outside of curling. And like, it breaks my heart. Like that kind of stuff really affects me because, I know what an amazing young man he is. And I hate that, there are people that have treated him so poorly. And, Mama Bear kind of like, I kind of want to step in and do something about it. So for me, I would do it more in a quiet, like private, personal way.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize, some of us are much more bold in our action and public in our action, and that's perfectly valid and powerful in its own right. But also that behind the scenes action can be very, important, significant in its own right. And I think, Helen, to your credit, there are a lot of young curlers who've come through junior curling and Curling Canada, and not just Next Gen, but the whole system. I've spoken to many of them in this podcast series who are going on to do amazing things in their personal life, not just their curling life. And particularly young members of the LGBTQ community who are coming through curling. And so, I had a bit of a conversation with Darren Allen on this, and I was maybe wondering what your thought would be is, for coaches who may be trying to empower youth that they're working with, or trying to be kind of the best ally or mentor for them, are there any tips that you would have, or suggestions or lessons you would have for them to maybe be aware that, you might have someone on your team who, is on a journey of their own self-identity and struggling, and maybe some ways of how to help them as a person, but also in that role?
Yeah, well, I actually work on a committee for the transgender and non-binary inclusion policy. So I've worked on that committee, and basically we work on 3 pillars. So we work on safety, fairness, and inclusion. And so I would say, for any coaches out there, those 3 pillars should be for everybody, safety, fairness, and inclusion. And it's so true. Like even my daughter, she'll come home from school and share stories about, so-and-so identifies this way, and then the next week, so-and-so identifies that way. And, I hear personal stories just through young kids. And I do see it in curling too. And I think the key is just keep having conversations, keep them talking. You don't have to ask them any direct questions, but just make them feel comfortable and safe. And, at some point in time, they might end up sharing a little bit more about their story, and try not to make judgments of like girlfriend, boyfriend. Leave it more open-ended, just, who do you enjoy spending time with? A question like that would be better than, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? And just, as the coach, showing that you're open to any type of conversation. You don't know where it's going to go. And you also don't know how that young person's feeling inside. They might not feel comfortable. They might not feel safe. They might not feel vulnerable. And then there's that whole trust piece.
Mm-hmm.
Because if somebody shares really personal information with you, and then you tell somebody else, and that gets out, they'll never speak to you. Like you've ruined sort of that trust bond. And I've had a number of coaches call me to say confidentially, mm-hmm. obviously, and say, I have an athlete who is really questioning where they identify, and what do I do? And I'll say, let them follow their own journey, because in our events, we let them self-identify. So we're not going to ask anybody any questions. So if somebody wants to enter a U18 provincial competition on the male side, great. We're not going to ask any questions, but that's where you're choosing to play with your teammates there. Go for it. So as a coach, just leave that open-ended. And in competition, it's hard because there is a male side and there is a female side. So at some point in time, when you get into competition, for instance, like our U21, it goes to a world event. So we don't control the rules at the world level. But for us at Curling Canada, any event that we have, we want them to feel comfortable to enter the event that they feel the most comfortable. And their teammates obviously need to mm-hmm. understand that's where their comfort is as an athlete, and the coach. And so if you can kind of wrap your arms around them and say, we've got you, it's wherever you're the most comfortable, we love you, we want you part of our sport, let's figure this out together.
No, and thank you for speaking to that, Helen. I think that was really, really insightful. And there's something to be said about taking a kind of more empathetic, open-ended, listening approach to, interacting with folks in the queer community more broadly, but specifically from that coaching lens of being an advocate, but also understanding that person's journey is happening on their own time and in their own way, and you can support them. not push them, right? And just being aware of that, because that can happen in small ways. And it's also a credit to Curling Canada to some degree, to what you were speaking to there at the end. You know, that empathetic approach to trans and non-binary youth in particular in sports is much more rare than we would like to admit it is. And so just being aware of that as we kind of move through that conversation is really, really important. You know, credit to you, but also the others at Curling Canada who have allowed that to be the way that that has operated and will continue to do so. So thank you, firstly, and a credit to the organization. You did mention how you have reacted or seen some of Greg's experiences that he's shared very bravely on his platforms and social media. I think many people have seen them. I've seen plenty of them, but I've known Greg for a long time, so they've impacted me that way. So Greg, did you want to speak to your experiences?
Yeah, I'll start with the good note. I think the symposium last year was amazing. I think that like across the board, in DEI, that was amazing that Curling Canada was a leader in sport in this country in doing that. And it was amazing. It was soul stirring, it was informative, it was raw, and I think that was amazing. It was an amazing time in Niagara Falls. I think another really good part, and then I'll go into the only really negative curling part I have, but they're in the same story. So the really good part was for me being out as a curler was with my friend John Epping at the Brier in 2021, and we knew that it was a very important game, and obviously that people coming up younger than us would see this, and it would be a big moment. So we held the pride flag, and it was a good game, and I only curled 65%, but we're not going to talk about that. But no, it was a really good moment with a good friend, and I was so grateful that we had that opportunity and that platform to do that and to talk to the media and that afterwards. To kind of go into on the same lens there, that it was really wonderful and it was great. I'm going to go into the same lens, and when it really wasn't, it was the really negative comments online. And 100%, as Karen alluded to earlier, everyone says don't look at them, but like, you do,
You can't
right?
not.
You can't not, right? So whatever I post, and sometimes I post about political issues, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I just had a coffee. So whatever it is, I'm ready to look at the comments. So everyone says, don't do it, Greg. And I'm like, that's okay. That's okay. I'm good. So I looked at the comments, and just like was floored. Um, the kind of crazy part is when we talk about our country at this moment, I think that we're more divided than ever in the saddest way. We're coming so far, we're making a lot of strides and a lot of progress, but we're getting really divided, and people who have very hateful views are feeling franchised with those, and they're connecting with other people in those kind of groups, which is absurd in 2023. But some of them, hit a little bit of a core to me when they started throwing the Bible at me. And not a lot of people know, but I'm actually a person of faith, and I'm a Christian. And a fun fact, when I graduated high school, it didn't happen, but I was going to be a Baptist pastor. I know, crazy. You would never think this right now, but I was going to be. So when I saw, that thrown at me as for being a queer man, I was just like, and I had to kind of work through that myself my whole life. And I'm, luckily for me, I have a very accepting and open church family, and they're lovely. But to kind of see that thrown at me was kind of like going back into a part of my life that was really dark. So that was really, really hard. And also seeing that, it wasn't even just that either. It was obviously there was the level of using someone's faith as a weapon, but there was also people using the narrative that by being a queer man, that you're less of a man. So it was, or the other lens that Karen was talking about when you were at the Scotties was, do we need to know this? Like, do we do like, that was actually probably the nicest one, was the do we need to know this? Right? The other ones were just so brutal and just so vile. So those were really, that's the only really negative thing that I have um, from curling, but it never came from curlers. I mean, maybe behind my back, I said before in an interview, I said, maybe, someone was like, I can't believe I lost to that queen, but I never heard it. I never heard it, but I'm sure they might have thought it, right? How do we lose to someone with that delivery who watches RuPaul's Drag Race all the time, right? Like maybe they thought that, but I might have been underestimated, but never anything to my face from curlers, just those kind of social media things. As Helen said, and I got this on my own. You don't need to fly out and take care of me, but I appreciate it so much. But yeah, I've had some outside of curling. I've had some really, truly awful experiences. And see, my mother isn't going to watch this because my mother isn't very tech savvy. Even when I was in Calgary and I didn't even tell a ton of people in my network, I was heading back to my hotel and I went down a street that was the wrong street. So this is like 2 weeks ago. And you can rent these scooters in different cities. And a group of guys came up to me in the early 20s. And I was just walking, trying to navigate back to my hotel. And I was on a street of a commercial district there, not my hotel street, but there was nothing open. So I had like no resources, anybody whatsoever. And these guys said, gay is being a choice. Sorry, being gay is a choice. I was like, I just turned my shoulder. I didn't even utter any words because I was just like, what is going on? Then they came back probably about a foot or two away from me on the scooters, a group of 5 guys, early 20s, and I said the F word and not the one that ends in a K. So they said that to me a few times and some other disgusting things. And they kind of circled the block. So I had to actually call 911 on my vacation for the police to come and pick me up so I could get an escort back to my hotel because I thought I was going to get the crap beat out of me. So that was 2 weeks ago, and that's 2023. But there's a plethora of experiences that I've had for just existing. St. John's is luckily a very colorful city, as anyone knows, but I've experienced a ton of hate here from one time physical and had my jaw broken for existing, and then times where then people just said things to me that were just vile. So and that's my mother calling now, so I'm not going to tell her this. I don't want to upset her. Sorry, Mom. But it is truly the last point I have on this is it is not a utopia for queer people, no matter. And I know that my experiences are as a cis white male, so I can only imagine people in our gender diverse and trans communities, what they're facing and what they face every single day. Because it is absolutely vile. And for the people that think, oh, well, why are you waving your flag around come June month? Well, it is because that our lives are still at risk. It's because that our existence, no matter who we are in the community, is questioned and people don't think it's valid. It's because they think it's a choice. We still have so much work to go. And sadly, sometimes I really feel like there's parts of our country and parts of our world that are stepping back. New Brunswick, your home, Will, it's so disgusting what's happening there. And, kudos to anybody, that voted against that. I think it's just absurd that that's even happening in this country. But you don't have to look further than the United States either. So even in countries that are supposed to be leaders for human rights, we are really getting failed. Like we're getting a big F, and it's a travesty. And I think that there's so much work to go. That's why, standing up for us and us standing up and being visible is more important now than ever before.
Yeah, and absolutely, and thank you for speaking to that, and for, as you put it earlier, being raw in that way, Greg. I think it's really important, but also impactful and powerful for people to hear that reality and your lived experience. For those who may not have seen it when these things have happened, because you have been very open about it on social media, to your credit, and very powerfully so. And I think, one of the things we have to learn from this as well is that what you and John did, and what you do, and what John does regularly, and a number of us have done in terms of visibility, from those vile experiences, you understand the power that small gesture may have for a young person or an older person somewhere who is struggling with who they are, may face harm for who they are, or may be in an incredibly dark place, and the only thing they have is the sport they love.
Yeah.
And then they see someone that they can identify with in the sport they love, openly talking about who and why they love, right? And that message can be unbelievably powerful for people, right? Because it cracks that mirror of loneliness, of fear, of division, to show someone that there is a pathway where you can be true to who you are in a safe and loving environment. For many who, as you rightly said, Greg, due to privilege or other things, may not have that position in their life. And so, the moments like that you and John shared, but also with some of the activism that you've done on social media as well, is truly important for exactly that reason. And that's why, as I think you articulated at the beginning as well, is, it's really disappointing when people question why that matters, right? As we said earlier, we'll talk about a cisgender heterosexual family and celebrate it. But the moment we talk about other types of families or our own, suddenly that's wrong. And we're suddenly pressing something upon someone. It's an agenda.
Yeah.
No, it's not an agenda. It's who they are and who they love. And just because that's different to you doesn't mean you get to treat them differently, right? And so thank you for speaking to that. And I think that's really important. And I think, as Helen said earlier, anytime we see these things happening in real time in your life, and when you share them, it does strike a really personal chord. I feel that pain. I live in Ottawa, and I've seen everything happening in my home province of New Brunswick, and it has been an incredibly emotionally exhausting time. An unbelievably emotionally exhausting time. And for those who may not know the situation, I won't get into it here, but I encourage you to do your research on what's been going on in New Brunswick with an issue called Policy 713, and I would highly recommend you look into that. Karen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
transitioning from that.
Yeah. I also would say that, like, my experiences within the curling community have been generally very positive ones, and finding really disappointing experiences, thankfully there weren't a ton to choose from. I do think it's important, what Greg was mentioning there, like, our experiences. I mean, I don't know all of you on the call all that well, but I'll speak for myself. Like, again, I'm a cis white person. Again, I'm straight passing, so my experiences are not the experience of a person of color, of an Indigenous person, of a trans person, like all of these other experiences that are so valid and so important. And kudos to you guys for putting this call together. But you can kind of see there's 4, at least white, as far as I can tell, white faces on this call, right? 4 cis faces on this call. And that in itself is a little bit telling, that we don't have a lot of those voices participating in things like this, and we need to continue to work on that. So that's, a little bit of a caveat to say that, yes, a lot of us here are saying, we have great experiences in curling, but we don't know what those other experiences are, because we're not hearing them as much. So that's, I think, an important thing that we need to keep in mind going forward. But all that to say, yeah, my experiences have been pretty positive. I kind of go back to that first Scotties experience as sort of a big one, because it was kind of the first time I was sort of, I'm far from a professional curler these days, and that was kind of the first time I had any kind of spotlight on me, and especially one where I was speaking about my private life. Like Helen mentioned, I'm not exactly a person who was outwardly talking about my personal life all that much at the time. I was dating a woman. That was it. There was not really, I wasn't having conversations with people about that, or really speaking very candidly about how I identified or anything like that. So it was sort of the first experience I had in that. And so one particular piece stands out, which is at the end of the Scotties, there's always a montage of all the shots through it. The focus of that year's montage was relationships at the Scotties. There were people who were cousins on different teams, there were coaches who were parents, there were, you know, people in the audience who were watching their partners. There was nothing about two people who were living together in a 5-year relationship playing on the same team. And again, you know, I don't know if there was thought put into it or not. And I don't, you know, it is what it is. At the time, it was the way things were, I guess. But it was interesting. And, you know, I noticed it and I didn't want to be the one to say anything. I kind of just left it. And actually someone else, a guy named Simon, who some of you probably know, posted something on his Facebook saying, does anyone else find it strange that there's like a couple on a team and there was a whole thing on relationships with the Scotties and they weren't mentioned? Like, isn't that weird? And, you know, I actually found that as much as that's kind of my example of disappointment, it also was great for someone else to notice it and point it out. You know, we're going to talk a little bit more about what allies can do and stuff, but one of the big things is like, we don't always want to be waving the flag. We don't always want to be fighting for this. You know, it is, like you said, it is exhausting right now. The world feels like it's going backwards. It feels like our rights are more at risk than ever, and it's exhausting. And it's great when someone who is not part of the community, but who's an ally, voices that for us, and we don't constantly have to be the one saying something. So, you know, it was a disappointing situation. And again, I think that times have changed pretty significantly, but I think it was kind of the first time that the folks at TSN and Curling Canada, who do great things now, I just want to say that I don't mean to be like, you know, getting anyone in trouble or anything, but I think people just didn't really know what to do with it at the time. And so, so that was, you know, it was tough. Definitely. It made me feel a little bit like, is it like, should I be keeping this more secret? Like, you know, we're not talking about this, don't ask, don't tell. It felt really like, why does this have to be kind of hidden away when all these other relationships are being highlighted? So that was, I think, probably the most disappointing experience in curling. Like Greg, although not to the same extent, I've had some negative experiences outside of the curling community, but for the most part, my life in curling has been really inclusive. In terms of really positive experience, Greg, I was really glad to hear you say that the game between you and John was a highlight for you, because that's actually what I wanted to say, was that I think, I don't know, what year was that? Was that 2021? 2021. So that was 5 years after my first Scotties appearance. And I remember that game, and I remember thinking, wow, look how far Curling Canada and TSN and everybody involved in this community has come. Like, we were playing on the same team and they were like, oh God, what do we say about this? And like, let's just not talk about it. We'll just let it go. And then here you two are playing in this game, you know, spotlight, pride flags, like interviews, like it was celebrated. And actually, I think it was maybe that same year, but John was playing at the Briar and his partner was there watching him. And they, you know, sometimes they see people in the audience, they put the camera on them, they put a little thing underneath it, and they said, I can't remember if they were married at the time, but like John's husband or John's partner on the screen. And I remember seeing that and thinking, oh, like, yes, like it's happened, you know, it's finally changed. And, you know, I don't know when that shift happened exactly. And I think Curling Canada is doing a really good job at trying to get there, and they've made a ton of progress. But that was 5 years after that first Scotties experience, which was, you know, so kind of awkward and weird and hushed. And then here they were, like, shining the spotlight on this amazing moment between the two of you. And that for me was really, it wasn't my experience. So I'm glad that you said it. I don't want to be like stealing your stories, but for me, that was such a positive thing to see, that like progress had been made and things were actually happening. You know, a lot of organizations throw the pride flag on their, you know, marketing or whatever and say, hey, look, we're pride inclusive. But Curling Canada and TSN and whoever else had done something. It was different. It was highlighting non-straight folks in the sport world. And that was a really big difference to me. That actually really meant a lot to me. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, seeing people in these, why it's important to see queer folks in the sport community, but that is a perfect example. Even as a person, you know, I was like 30 at the time, you know, I'm very comfortable with who I am and what I do. But even then I saw that and was like, oh, that it's so great that this change has happened and that Curling Canada and TSN have done this. You know, it was pretty meaningful for me. So thank you for being there for that, Greg.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think there's something really important you said there, Karen, of like, all of us would wish nothing more than not to be activists.
Yeah, I don't want to be constantly having to fight for this.
Right.
You know? I don't want to.
This, like, every time, every Pride, we're filming this during Pride Month, right? And every time Pride comes along, out come the comments of it's indoctrination, shoving it down our faces, and well, it's propaganda. So, well, no, it's a very simple equation. If you are not open and out there, being visible and being heard, it is easier to be forgotten. And when it's easier to be forgotten, it's more reticent for politicians and others to commit harm. And that's something we've seen recently quite a bit. Again, we've spoken to some of it in different ways. And so next time you think about seeing that visibility, whether it's a company's logo or a Pride post or a Pride parade, and you ask yourself the question of, why is this important? Maybe think about that a little. And think, well, if we didn't have visibility during Pride Month, outside of Pride Month, but if we didn't make those efforts to be more inclusive to the LGBTQ plus community, where would our rights be, right? They certainly didn't come out of by a lot of people just sitting around waiting. They came from decades of advocacy and harm and pain. And for the record, largely from people of color within the community, for the record, right?
Trans women of color too.
Particularly. Right. And so it's important that we acknowledge that. And I think, sometimes people also forget that Pride Month is also a historical recognition of that fight. It's not just, all right, everybody, dig out your flag, put it on the balcony. So I just wanted to take a second to recognize that. And that leads into, as you alluded, Karen, our next question, which is, why is it important for the curling community to take steps to be more inclusive of 2S LGBTQIA plus folks? Helen, did you want to start this one?
Sure. I think, for all of us, diversity is good for all of us. And it's healthy for, I've heard a couple of different speakers say, wouldn't it be nice if a curling club looked like the shopping mall? You open the door and it's just everybody. It's public is welcome. Everybody's there. Some people are with family. Some people are with friends. Doesn't matter how you self-identify. Doesn't matter what culture you're from. It doesn't matter. You can go to the shopping mall. So wouldn't it be great for the curling club doors to be like that, where just you're welcome. Everybody's here. And we want to see everybody there, because that's how we all learn and become more empathetic and compassionate for others, is by hearing their stories and networking and getting to know them better. And so I think, one of the things with curling is, it's called you have to have a membership, or it's a curling club. And, is that something, can I just go in there and try it? So I think curling clubs are really trying hard to, right now they're in a real financial struggle for a lot of different reasons. So they've got to make it work, but they're trying to make it as welcoming as possible too. And I think, for a lot of things, policy is a driver. And so different curling clubs have different policies. And so you're going to have some that are more welcoming than others, but it really only takes one person to kind of start that conversation and keep that going. And so, if any curling club in Canada is wondering what to do, Curling Canada's, feedback to them is, we have a policy. Here's the transgender non-binary inclusion policy. If you're not sure what to do, here it is. So it talks about the competitive side, it talks about the recreational side, and for all of it, it's about safety, fairness, and inclusion, all of it. So you're not going to hear one person from Curling Canada say, the rules are different. They're not different. It's the same. Doesn't matter if you're in a recreational league or a competitive league. It should be the same. Everybody should be treated equally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, what you said there, to policy being a driver is really important, right? It's the vehicle which moves us forward, but also the one that protects us when things come back, right? And that's why we see such reaction when policy is changed or what have you, but also a reason for policy to be made in your club or in your facilities or in your communities, and adapted to what you can see, whether it's from Curling Canada or elsewhere, right? It's one of the elements in my All Heart Curling Award plan that I had done with the Capital Winter Club in Fredericton was talking about, well, why don't you have a board member who's a member of the LGBTQ plus community? Why don't you have a sticker on your door? Which may seem like a very small thing, certainly is a very cheap action to take, but may be the thing that makes someone welcome from that community when they may have seen, as you said, well, that's a club. I don't know. But if they walk through your door, they might see a vibrant and loving and welcoming community that they may never access if you didn't have that on your door, right? Or the drag shows down the street at the bar. Why not have it at your club? Why not? Why not? Right. And like these questions, and I was at the symposium for the Business of Curling Symposium in Sackville, and someone asked a question about youth in this case, but welcoming other communities into their curling club. And they were struggling getting youth into the club, but also queer community and other folks. And I said, well, have you asked them why they're not there? Right. And that's always, that's crucial. So Karen, what do you think? Why is it important for us to work to include LGBTQ plus folks more?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've all seen, at least look on my social media, there's always stories of like these heartwarming stories of kids seeing themselves represented in some sort of industry, whether it's sport or entertainment or politics or whatever job. And when people see themselves represented in something, it starts to make them feel a bit more safe, that it's a safe community that they can, be themselves in. And seeing that diversity, seeing that representation in the sport is, I think, like you said, we can talk all we want about how can we get people into the clubs and things like that. But realistically, if you are a person of color and you walk into a curling club and every single person is white and every photo on the wall is of a white person, it may or may not feel like a super welcoming space. Your interactions in areas like this may not have always been positive. It's the same thing when we talk about the queer community. If you, walk in, there's no, in a new environment, if I don't see anything that sort of gives me an indication that this is going to be a safe space, I might have my guard up a little bit more, and rightly or wrongly, in some, smaller communities where there's often, where we need more curlers, there sometimes isn't as much acceptance. So, in certain environments, if there's not, like you said, a rainbow sticker on the door, it's such a simple thing. And, there's a lot of talk, especially at Pride Month, about, companies rainbow washing their stuff and how, that's not enough. You can't just put a rainbow sticker on your door or whatever. And that's true. You have to do more than that. Absolutely. But something as simple as that, even just changing your logo, during Pride Month, that at least tells me that you are wanting to do something about it. Assuming you're not just doing it to make money off of the community, that's a whole different thing. But, at least if you've got a sticker on your door, if you've changed your logo, at least that tells me like, okay, we're attempting. We know we're going to get some social media comments that are going to be negative, but we're going to do it anyway because it's important that we start to show people that we're accepting. So, I think there are small things that can be done to make sure that people feel welcome. Like you said, something as simple as a rainbow sticker on the door tells me, at least when I walk into a place, that somebody in here is making an effort to tell me that I'm safe here. Whether or not that's true, that's a whole different conversation. And obviously there needs to be more than just a rainbow sticker on the door, but it's a start. It's something. And I just think it's important, we talk about needing to see that diversity in our sport, and it starts with the kids. It starts with the young, it starts with the new curlers coming in. We can't, snap our fingers and all of a sudden have competitive curlers, from all different backgrounds, unfortunately, as great as that would be. So we have to start with the people who are just coming to curling and making sure that there's a difference in that group of people that is starting, that everybody feels welcome and that we can welcome, new people into this environment that we love so much.
Absolutely. Very, very well said, Karen. Thank you. Greg, why is it important?
I agree so much with what was said previously, and especially on the sticker. So I think I talked about it at the symposium last year, but the Child Youth Advocate of Newfoundland Labrador, on schools and public facilities and recreational buildings, they have a rainbow flag on the sides. In the middle it says everyone is welcome and included here. And I called them is like, and I said, we need them. So I think there was 100 at Ballyhaley, even though there's no curling at Ballyhaley anymore, but I hope they still kept them up or they still got them somewhere. But we put them up, we put up the resources, we printed off what was from Curling Canada on DEI, which if you have a curling club, if you're running it or if you're running the junior program, you need to look at it ASAP. Um, but yeah, I think it's so important because if we want people to stay with this sport, 100% what Karen said, they need to see themselves represented. You know, for me, in a different lens, I come from you know, a more underprivileged socioeconomic background, and I was the poor kid in the country club. So I felt like, you know, I stuck out there. However, luckily there was a little bit of talent, so I stuck with it. But you know, the same thing for like for the queer kid, you know, the same thing for someone of a different ethnicity or gender identity. By not seeing somebody like yourself there and you feel like you are way out of place and there is nothing that makes you feel welcome, it is a really tough time, A, entering the door, but it's a really tough time going back into that door again. So, you know, I think it's super important because we want to grow our sport. First of all, I think we need to address the awkward, which is, you know, we might have a little bit of a demographic issue with curling, and our numbers. I don't think, Helen, you can get mad at me if I'm wrong. I hope I'm right what I'm saying, but I hope I'm wrong in the same breath. I don't think our numbers are what they were in the 80s for curling. I don't think that we have as many curlers, and I think as we did before. So we need to be inclusive, not even just on the lens of that it's the right thing to do, but if we want our sport to grow, we need to be. So it's kind of imperative that we need to have more people in our clubs. Um, and I think, you know, the other part of it too is it can't be like Karen said earlier, it can't be, and like yourself, well, we don't want to be here complaining all the time. We get no joy out of this. We really don't. We want our problems to start ending. Um, but truly, we want to have people who are allies that are speaking up for us. And that is kind of the lens of this too. I think I could be wrong, but I think there was a little bit of allyship in the question. Could be wrong, but they need to be more vocal. It can't be just token and posting a picture, which is wonderful, and it is. It is so good, but you know, you need to eradicate the locker room talk. You know, you need to eradicate um, somebody commenting on um, someone's femininity or someone's masculinity or whatever along those lines. I mean, we're looking at this in a very queer lens, but whatever it is, you know, anything that is intolerant needs to stop. So allyship isn't just for our community, it's for all communities and all minorities. So I think, you know, clubs, what they can do is it can be very simple, but it can get people in the doors, it can make people feel safe. And truly, it is not, it's the right thing to do, don't get me wrong, but we need curling to grow. Its viewership is growing, but we need people, especially in the grassroots levels of the sport, to grow. And that means that we need to become less white, less straight, and less cis. And truly, that's the only way that we have to go because that is what Canada looks like. And like Helen said, our shopping malls don't necessarily look like our curling clubs. So, you know, and the good part of this too, I bowl as well. I'm sorry, I'm rambling now.
Okay.
It's so late here, right? It's 8:30. But I bowl as well, and I'm a competitive bowler. And if we have a democratic, we have that too. We have a demographic issue, but other sports are not having these discussions. And I bowl 5-pin, and the numbers are going down across the board. They're getting less TV coverage, and they're not having these really important, impactful conversations that we're having. And I think that, you know, it's just amazing that we are. You know, it's it's important to address the awkward in anything in our society and anything in our lives. And I'm glad that Curling Canada is doing so, and I'm glad, well, that you're spearheading this because the only way that we can make change is actually discuss what the issue is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for transitioning us into the allyship question of what does what does allyship mean, and how can people be better allies? It's okay, Greg. It was a good segue. So, Karen, what does allyship mean to you, and how can curlers be better allies to the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of said it a couple times already, but we are tired, to be completely honest. Pride Month came around. I own a small business as well, and so all the small businesses start posting, "Oh, it's Pride Month. Here's and quite honestly, I found it exhausting this year because the number of hateful comments that come from those positive posts are now kind of overshadowing it for me. It's kind of upsetting that the month that's supposed to be about celebrating Pride is actually making me feel worse than the rest of it. I'm kind of like, I'm excited for it to be over because I'm tired of all the fighting and the comments and the negativity, which is the complete opposite of what we're supposed to be seeing in June. So, I was chatting with a friend of mine. Her and her wife and their daughter were planning a trip to Florida to go to Disney World. I'm not sure which one it is. And we're canceling their trip because it's just not a safe place to go right now. And she was mentioning it to her family, and her family's like, "What are you talking about? It won't be that bad." Because if you're not in the community, you may not, I know my social media, we all know our social media becomes kind of an extension of our community. It's our own bubble. And so the things you click on are the things you see over and over again. My social media right now, I'm toying with the idea of closing it entirely, because every single day I'm reading negative things. Today it was that there was a US-Mexico soccer game that had to be ended early because of homophobic chants. There's the stuff going on in New Brunswick. There was something about a young athlete out west who some old guy was saying this must be a trans person. Like, it's just every single day there's a negative story, and I'm finding it exhausting. My wife and I have a daughter who's 15 months old, and until this year, I would say we were talking with our community, like, how great is it that, our kids are going to grow up in this, kind of new generation where people are so much more accepting and things are great and improving all the time. And this year, I would say that has been, my feeling is that it's been walked back. Now we're starting to have conversations about, the anxiety we have about raising a kid in this world right now. Last June we had a little party, a Pride barbecue at our house. We had a Pride flag on the door. I didn't put one up this year because, a couple neighborhoods away, somebody had a Pride flag ripped down and torn to shreds and like burned a little bit and left on their driveway. So, it feels like things have shifted. A lot of that, started in the States and has been coming up. And if you are not in the community, you may not be as aware of it as we are. You might not be reading about it as often as we are hearing all the stories, but we are, and it is exhausting, and we are tired, and we don't want to be having these fights. I don't want to be reading stories about, the high school my daughter is going to go to, parents protesting outside of it and stomping on Pride flags in the month of June. I don't want to have to go to the counter protest for that. I don't want to have to be, constantly posting on social media about how you can be a better whatever. Like, I'm tired. We just want to live our lives. We want to curl. We want to, I want to be with my wife. I want to raise our daughter. We just want to live our lives, and celebrate who we are. And we're not, and so to be a better ally, like, do some of that work for us. There's, I'm going to completely butcher it, but there's a quote somewhere that's, if you, in times of injustice, if you stay silent, you're picking the side of the oppressor, which, is basically saying, like, if you say nothing, you're not on our side. You're not helping, you're almost furthering the other side by not speaking up. So you can't just stay silent. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm not going to have an opinion on this." It's our lives. It's our rights. You can't just be like, "Oh, it doesn't affect me, so it's not my fight." Someone you love is probably a part of the queer community. You probably know somebody, whether you know it or not, that is part of the queer community. And we notice when people support us or don't. And, just speak up. Don't let these things go by. There's, I won't get into all this, but anyway, just don't sit around and do nothing. We need those voices. We need allies supporting this as well. We don't want to be, constantly, "Oh, these people so woke," and whatever else. We want that support from our allies as well, and we need those voices to be able to be heard, so that it's not just always complaining, as Greg was saying. That's what it sometimes feels like. So
yeah, well said. Helen, what does allyship mean to you, and what can curlers do to be better allies?
Oh, I think Karen summed up a lot of good things. You know, you see something, say something. You know, it is about standing up, and it is about just being part of any community, all communities, not just, you know, none of us identify in one community. We identify in a lot of different ways in our own lives. And I think the key is to just, you know, keep the action towards inclusiveness and kindness towards one another. And um, actually, I don't read the news a lot anymore because it's it's kind of depressing to read the news. And I'm not a huge social media person, and I think um, that saves me from, you know, not being so exposed to all kinds of stories. Like the only time I've seen TikTok or is when my daughter like will share a funny video with me or something. But man, there's a lot of stuff out there that just consumes people. And I think the hard part is, you know, we're trying to work against a lot of things instead of working towards a lot of things. So um,
Mhm.
yeah, I think just take action in whatever way you can is kind of key, whether you're in a leadership role or not. Just being inclusive.
Oh, absolutely. And Greg, you spoke to the importance of allyship, but what can curlers do to be better allies?
Yeah, I kind of answered the question before I was asked it, wasn't I? But no, I think that there's a plethora of things that you can do, and I want to go back and reiterate the importance of allyship because of how divided our world is. Give you just a quick example here in St. John's, and a shout out to Sarah Worthman with the NL Queer Research Initiative. We had a counter protest at Confederation Building, which is the legislature here in St. John's. And I wasn't here, I was in Calgary. But it was a counter protest because they were talking about safe and caring inclusive schools and just some very bigoted, far right opinions on that. And we outnumbered them 400 to 4. So that's pretty good as a counter protest. So I'm really grateful to be from a place like St. John's and Newfoundland Labrador, but um, certainly, you know, it's not like that across the country. It's not like that around even the Western world. But yeah, so go to something like that. That's an example I wanted to make was, okay, well, you agree that it's bigoted what they're getting on with and what they're saying, but all you're going to do is share it on Facebook and you're not going to attend though you had the day off and your best friend is gay or your brother is um, you know, or your brother is, or your sister, or you know, someone's non-binary that's super close to you. So why would you not attend? If you have the ability to attend, and it is basically about the human rights of someone that's dear and near to you, then attend, come out and support. Um, and it could be, you know, if you can attend something as simple as sharing, and it isn't, you know, it isn't necessarily performative or, you know, anything like that. It is important to do that as well. As a curler or as any athlete, speak out against locker room talk. It happens a lot more than you think. I could be wrong. It might be a little bit more on the male side than the female side of the sport, um, which is sad. But speak out against it. You know, if your teammate is gay and someone's making a comment to the locker room and you're not going to talk about that and you're not going to address it or you're not going to, as we'd say in Newfoundland, tell them where to go and how to get there. I guess we all say that in a way, but if you're not going to say that or you're not going to educate them, then you're not standing up for your queer teammate. You know,
Mhm.
like I can only imagine if someone was saying something about me, uh, and I have no issue speaking up for myself whatsoever. But if I heard someone say something about me in a locker room that didn't know me and it was homophobic, um, and my whole team heard it, and I consider myself really, really close friends with my whole team, and no one said anything. You know, I think I would be incredibly hurt by that. Um, that's that's just one example. But anything that you can do to educate yourself is a big one too. I know that some people think that they know, but they don't necessarily know. So as exhausting and depressing as it can be, for you know our straight cis allies, educate yourself on what's happening around the world, that our existence is illegal and punishable by death in a plethora of countries around the world, that this isn't 2023 in every country in this globe, right? So educate yourself on that and know the importance of it, because it is human rights, and when we're talking about human rights, let's never forget how far we've came, but still there's people that want to crawl us back in. So I think education is key, speaking up is key, showing up is key. And if you can't show up, then make sure you share and make sure that you're there for people that you love and care about, because it's going to be a hard pill to swallow if we find out that you didn't stand up for us when you had the opportunity to do so.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, Greg, and thank you for speaking to that. I think I've definitely resonated with that a bit. And I've been doing a lot of, I've been doing a lot of
Not in
advocacy.
curling though.
No,
I had good
totally.
teammates. I'm not calling out any teammates. They were great.
Absolutely. And like I think I've been really lucky to have some really great teammates. I've had a slur used on the sheet beside me one time when I was curling, and my teammates acted very quickly to support me in that way, as did my coach, thankfully. But even as you mentioned, recently, it twofold as an Atlantic Canadian in the queer community, but also in the Ottawa bubble, where people often forget that things exist east of Quebec. Just saying.
I'm born and raised in Ottawa, so I understand what you're saying. I know where
right.
I understand.
When someone starts talking about sorry, this is my little brief tangent. Forgive me. When someone starts talking about outrage at a school board in York not raising a pride flag, as they rightfully should, right? As they rightfully should. But if I mention policy 713 in New Brunswick, there's just eyes glazed over. Excuse me, I got to go take a nap. Where is New Brunswick, and who's there? Why do I care? Right. And I remember at the time when this happened, because the whole fiasco in New Brunswick occurred shortly after the York Catholic District School Board voted not to raise the pride flag. I did a lot of outreach to folks here. I work in government relations, and just personally on a basis, I let a lot of my friends who work in government know, like, hey, by the way, our rights are being attacked, and trans youth and queer youth are being attacked in policy. You were more than willing to go on Twitter and condemn a school board in New York. Have you said anything about New Brunswick? This was a month ago, and it's the entirety of the Department of Education of a whole province. It's supposedly dedicated to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Mm-hmm. You gonna just say anything?
Yeah.
And a month ago, the response I got back was, well, we don't want to talk about education. It's a jurisdiction of the provinces, and no, we stand up for LGBTQ plus rights. And then 3.5 weeks later, I'm very thankful to say, everybody and their mother is paying attention to what's happening in New Brunswick. Mildly frustrating, that interim period where I was, raising the alarm, but those kinds of things are exhausting, right? For all of us. And in that case, that's what I was doing. But many of us do that advocacy or see that in different ways or watch that in different ways. And it's tiring in different ways, right? Whether it personally reaches you, Helen, as you spoke to with Greg's experience earlier, and it personally affects you, and that can be tiring emotionally, and particularly if it happens on a regular basis, as it has to Greg and so many other people within the LGBTQ plus community for forever. And it still happens again. Allyship is standing up for others, even though you may not understand them, even though you may not agree with them. Stand up and speak up for them because you care for them, or you care for their rights. You may not even know them, but they matter. They matter to someone else. And if you're a parent in particular, and this is some of the most beautiful moments of Pride every single year, is you have parents who go to Pride because they understand that some people who are there do not have parents who accept or love them for who they are. And guess what? There are people in your curling community who have the same situation and the same feeling, and you can show them that love. Right? You don't know who's coming through your door as a curling club. You don't know what walk of life they've come from, what background they've come from, their socioeconomic status. You don't know them. But that doesn't mean you don't need to accept them. And that doesn't mean you can't show them love and empathy and treat them that way. Because sometimes sports, particularly in a moment like we're seeing right now, as we've all spoken to, where our rights are under attack in a number of areas, sometimes sports in the sporting community might be the only safe space that young person or that queer person or that LGBTQ plus person has. Remember that. And with that, quickly, as I understand we've gone long, and I'm not sorry for those listening. What is something that our curling clubs or associations or the curling community can do going forward to be more inclusive of the LGBTQIA2S plus community? Karen, did you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about all different things about just, to me, it's being vocal. Those examples of like Greg and John playing at the Briar, and there was a focus on that. They could have just been like, oh, these are two guys playing against each other. We're not, whatever. It's just some game. But being vocal and highlighting those stories, and outwardly being supportive, outwardly being allies. Right now we're at a point, we've talked about this, our various boards may or may not be the most diverse and maybe not as diverse as they should be, but the way to move forward is to still, at least if your board is not diverse, you need to be outwardly outspoken in support of diversity and inclusion. It can't just be like, oh, well, we're fine with it. We're not going to say anything, but we're fine with it. You have to actually do it. You have to be outwardly outspoken about it. I have had people speak to me and say, hey, I'm a gay curler and I don't really know where I can go, who I can talk to. Is there a group somewhere that I can be part of? I know of people who are queer and not out in the curling community as well, because they're not sure where those safe spaces are. Outwardly outspoken is what I can just kind of say, like, be really blunt. We are accepting, we welcome everybody. Those rainbow flags on the door seem like a tiny little thing, but they matter. Like, every little thing that you do matters. The language that you use, like putting people's pronouns even on your website, we kind of, like you said, in sport, Helen, have an issue with the fact that we have kind of a male and female category, and that's a whole other issue. But making sure people know that however they identify, they are welcome. They're welcome to be in the space that makes them the most comfortable. Just really making that clear and blunt, and not just kind of hoping it's clear without really saying it, and not wanting to offend anybody. Just do it. Say it out loud all the time.
Absolutely. Good points. Well made. Greg, what can we do going forward?
I agree pretty well entirely with what Karen said. I don't have much to add at all. Yeah, I think using inclusive language. I think one other part to kind of add on that is like when we address a crowd, say folks. I mean, in Newfoundland, we don't really use the English language. It's just a guide for us. So, ye, that might be, all ye here tonight, whatever, right?
Ladies and gentlemen can really just be.
We can eradicate that, right? Because not everybody fits into those categories. And I guess, if you have a Southern drawl, you can say y'all. But yeah, so that's one thing, kind of just to go on to that. I think the member associations, Curling Canada, are doing amazing work. Having the resources there is huge. Kind of hard lens to say, but like, is there a way that you can mandate that clubs use it? That's the hard, kind of awkward situation, especially that there is clubs that are not affiliated with their member association, and that is a fact here in Newfoundland. There is Newfoundland Labrador. I got to include Labrador, but there's arena clubs, or there's clubs that are not affiliated with the provincial body, that making sure that they have, they either use those resources, or can we get them affiliated or whatever, and make sure that we're all kind of under an umbrella and using the same kind of guide.
And that funding is contingent on that. You don't get funding and you don't get support if you're not falling under this umbrella and being supportive and being allies.
100%. I think that's the lens to kind of take it to, right? Yeah, your boards are another big one, making sure that your boards represent what your community looks like. But first of all, the issue before that is that you're not just going to have people in their first year of curling join the board, not necessarily. So there is going to be a transition period there where people need to feel comfortable in the space and then encouraged to get onto a board, then encouraged to get onto your provincial body, and etc. So, making sure that it is more diverse as your membership is important right off the go. And then after, making those steps necessary to make them comfortable in a more leadership position. Yeah, I think those are really huge ways. As said previously, the sticker on the door is so important. Um, it really is. It really, really is. And I know when I was questioning who I was as a kid, and I didn't know which way I would go, and I actually wasn't comfortable in my own skin going into school and seeing, everyone is safe and welcome. This is an inclusive space, right, with the rainbow flag. There was a part of me that I didn't even know existed, or I kind of tried to suppress, that was very glad and very happy about that. So that's, one really, really small way, but I think that the other ways are important. And trying to mandate that the guides are used and that they're looked at. That's a hard one to do, but I think that's quite important. And I like what Karen said, is that funding is based on that.
Yeah, for sure. Those are all important recommendations. And I think one thing I'd say for curling clubs in particular, and even associations, is like, what does your board look like? What does your staff look like? Right? It takes time to transition your membership, in terms of being more inclusive. It could take once. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
I got one really quick one.
Yeah.
Because our sports and a lot of sports have, the gender differences in, it just the way it is in a competitive level. I think that another way too, if you have the opportunity as a club, or if you can, I think that having a gender neutral bathroom is huge. I think if you have bathrooms that are whatever way you can make people that are not male or female cis comfortable, do so. I think that's one
And
thing.
really, like in a lot of cases in recreational curling, like, does it need to be men's and women's curling? You know what I mean? Like,
it doesn't.
Does it need, even in mixed, in mixed doubles, we're talking about like does it have to be a man and a woman? Like, you know what I mean? Think about that. Especially, we're competitive, it's one thing, but when you're talking about recreational curling, do you have to divide it based on that? Like, does it really matter? No, so don't,
I totally agree. So in the doubles league here at Ballyhaley last year and before, if 2 men or 2 women want to play, I didn't care. And I think that we can let, in a recreational lens of that, we can totally let that happen. And also, if you can break down, the gendered bathrooms as well, I think that's another key one. But if you have, a separate bathroom that you can make someone feel comfortable in, that you'd like to do that, give her any way that you can make it more inclusive, do it any way whatsoever.
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you off, Will.
No, it's okay, Greg. Thank you. That was an important point, and I was going to mention it as well. So really, really important you shared that. And again, for curling clubs and associations, as your staff, it can take one good inclusive hire for you to change the perspective someone has about your club or institution. Right? You may take time to welcome other members into your club, or it may take time to include other folks in the building, but you have control over who works at your facility. And if you're looking for staff, maybe think about making a more inclusive hire. Maybe.
And for the record, it only takes one bad person as well. So when you're hiring people, if you can't hire diverse people, at least hire people who are going to be inclusive. Like, if I see someone working somewhere and I know that they're homophobic or a bigot or whatever, like, that changes my whole perspective of that environment. Like, anyway, sorry to cut you off again.
No, again, really good points. So
I agree fully.
Just to close us off on this one, Helen, last but certainly not least, what can we do going forward to make curling more inclusive?
Well, I think the suggestions that have already been made are huge, and so I'm not going to repeat those. One thing I would love to see change is for people to stop when they welcome a group or sees people say, "Hey guys," drives me crazy. So you could have a curling coach talk to 4 girls, and that curling coach, male or female, starts the practice and says, "Okay guys, you ready? Here we go." So to Greg's point of saying folks or y'all or everyone, or, just acknowledging the group as opposed to putting a gender or some specific identity towards it. Make it a little bit more general as you welcome whoever is there. There's a curling club in Canada that was trying to figure out how to get the Indigenous community into the curling club. And so they spent time trying to figure it out. And then somebody said, well, we don't know what to do. Like this, we're not part of this community. So they worked with the Indigenous community, brought them to the curling club numerous times, and had them say, what would you like to see here? What would make you feel welcome when you walk into this curling club? And so what they did is the Indigenous community started putting some of their like their art and just different things that connected them. And what they did is they started holding meetings there. So they didn't go there to curl. They used it for their community. Why do we don't need to make everybody go on the ice. That's just one part of being inclusive. So that's another thing that clubs could do. And like, I was just at the Pride Nationals here in Halifax. That's a moneymaker. Like, Mayflower Curling Club did a fabulous job. It's in St. John's next year. That is a money maker. So from a business side, like, clubs need to look at, they're going to bring in a lot of money off the bar and off the, from food and ice rental and all that kind of stuff. And it's fun. Our community is a fun community. And so I think, there's no shortage getting volunteers, because they know when they volunteer at the Pride events, they're going to have fun, whether they're part of the community or not. I think that's a key piece too.
If there's any community ever in the history of humanity that has known how to throw a party, it is the LGBTQ plus community. We know how to have a good time. And so, Pride Nationals is one of those that's huge. My only lesson coming out of that as well is, like, if you're looking to do these kinds of things, like, someone asked me at one of the symposiums, like, should we have a Pride League? Sure, absolutely. But don't ask me, ask your community. If that's going to be something that welcomes them, then yes, sure, go for it. Don't call it the Gay Curling League, please. I've seen that a few times. Please don't, because you've already excluded the vast majority of the community by just calling it one of those things. So just think about this, like, in the inclusive language that some of us have spoken to and some of those other pieces. But as Helen rightly said, we know how to have a good time. We know how to have fun. This has been fun, and really important and really impactful. And thank you, Karen, Greg, and Helen, for joining me for this conversation and trusting me and having this conversation with all of you that I'm sure is going to be very important for people listening and watching at home. If you have had fun with us, please do share this video, or wherever you're listening to this podcast, do share the podcast with other folks, and try and get some more visibility to these issues in curling, but also outside in your own life. This might be an entry that someone has to learning about this subject and this discussion in a more casual kind of discussion. This podcast is made possible by Curling Canada. I'm really grateful to have the privilege to be able to host this, but thank you to them for allowing me to do so and for publishing it and providing myself, but all of these wonderful folks as well, with a platform to speak to these issues, firstly. Secondly, thank you to the World Curling Federation for sponsoring and funding this as well. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. And thank you for sharing your time with us. I'm Will Robertson. This has been the Curling for Change podcast on Curling with Pride. Happy Pride, but also take care.